All right, kiddos, welcome back. We are looking at Chapter 3, Section 3. We've looked at Southern colonies, we've looked at Middle colonies, we've looked at New England colonies, and now we're going to be talking about a economic philosophy that was going on in Europe and other places around the world, and how that economic philosophy affected England and their relationships with their American colonies. And that economic theory is mercantilism. Okay. Mercantilism is, let's get this show started here. Mercantilism is the belief that a country's wealth is measured in gold and silver obtained by a favorable balance of trade. All right, what do I mean by a favorable balance of trade? It means that the value of your exports must exceed the value of your imports. I like to think of it this way. In your household, if you buy more stuff, what happens to your bank account? It goes down because you're spending money. If you sell things, including your time, meaning you go to work, what happens to your bank account? It goes up. So think of buying things as importing goods and think of selling things as exporting goods. And you'll understand that rule number one of mercantilism is to export more than you import, or at least have the value of your exports exceed the value of your imports so that your country is obtaining wealth. All right. Now, mercantilist countries established colonies for the benefit of the mother country. So Spain had colonies, France had colonies, England had colonies. If you think about France had colonies in the New World, what were they interested in? They were interested in the fur trade, right? So those colonists weren't over here for their own benefit. Those colonists were over here for the benefit of France. Same thing with Spain, same thing with England. The colonists, in the mind of the mother country, existed to benefit that mother country. So England is going to start looking at the American colonies as a source of raw materials. Okay? They wanted lumber from the New World. They wanted cotton from the New World. They wanted tobacco from the New World. And in order to get these things, King Charles II had to regulate trade in the American colonies. Now, I'm going to stop for just a second. If you own a business, who do you want to sell your merchandise to? Well, that's an easy answer. You want to sell your merchandise to whoever is willing to pay the most money for it, right? Because that makes the most profit for you. King Charles II was not going to let colonists sell their products to the highest bidder. He was not going to let them sell their cotton and their lumber and their tobacco and their sugar to whoever would pay them the most money. Okay? They had to sell those products to England. And if you have to sell your products to England, if it's against the law for you to sell them to anybody else, what can England pay you for those products? They can pay you whatever they want to. Okay? In 1660, Parliament passed the Navigation Act. It required all goods traded by the colonies to be shipped on English ships, which meant they could be taxed by the English. The act also listed raw materials that could only be sold to the English. And another act was passed in 1663 that said all goods imported to the colonies had to first be taxed in England. If you're living in the colonies, this is making you very, very angry. The king is regulating your trade, which means you can't make the most amount of money off of your tobacco crops because you can't sell them to the country that would pay you the most money for them. You have to sell them to England. Okay? This is restricting the freedom of merchants in the American colonies, and they do not like it. Well, when people don't like laws that are in place, sometimes they try to change those laws, which is the right thing to do. And sometimes they flat out break those laws. And that's what the colonists did. The colonists started smuggling goods, both smuggling goods into the colonies to avoid paying British taxes, and, and smuggling goods out of the colonies to make more money. Okay? To curb this smuggling, the king punished Massachusetts by making it a royal colony and putting it under stricter control. This general sense of rebelliousness would continue in Massachusetts, and it's going to lead the king, the next king, Charles II, to really punish the American colonies by putting Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and the Plymouth colony all into what he called the Dominion of New England. All right, so now what was separate colonies are now combined together under the authority of Charles II. Now, Charles II obviously can't rule over the Dominion of New England while he's in England. So he puts Edmund Andros, appoints Edmund Andros as the governor of the Dominion of New England. All right. Now, what's Edmund Andros's job? Edmund Andros's job is to prevent smuggling in the colonies and make the colonists obey the navigation acts. So he further regulated trade, which further angered the colonists. All right. We are starting to set the stage for the American Revolution. Now, we're still a good 80, 90 years away from the American Revolution, but we're starting to sow those seeds of discontent with American colonists at the English over their over-regulation of the colonies. Okay? Going back to England for a second, this is also going to help set the stage for the American Revolution. James II was not a popular king. And the reason he was not a popular king was because he was Catholic. Remember, England's going back and forth, Protestant, Catholic, Protestant, Catholic, Protestant. They're tired of that. They're tired of this constant fighting back and forth between Catholics and Protestants. So now that we have a Catholic king in England, but we have a largely Protestant nation and a largely Protestant British Parliament, which is, British Parliament is the British government. Think of it like the American Congress. They didn't want to see a Catholic dynasty in England. They didn't want to see any more back and forth between Catholic and Protestant and all of the conflict that resulted from that. So they asked Mary, which was James's daughter, and her husband William to come and take the throne away from James, because William and Mary were Protestants. When William and Mary come to overthrow the king, he runs away. And William and Mary became co-rulers in England with very little to no bloodshed. This is called the Glorious Revolution because a revolution is an overthrow of the government. But they did so without any bloodshed, so we call it the Glorious Revolution. Okay? Well, what does this have to do with the American colonies, and why does it matter? It matters because the English, after the Glorious Revolution, established the English Bill of Rights. What is this? Well, after the Glorious Revolution, Parliament wanted protections for their freedoms. So they wrote the English Bill of Rights. It listed the rights that Parliament and English citizens were guaranteed to have, such as the freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, and the protection from cruel and unusual punishments. Does this sound familiar? It should, because these are the same things that were in the American Bill of Rights. All right? This idea of limiting the authority of the king and guaranteeing rights for citizens. This is important because not only is this going to affect England, this is going to affect the American colonies. They're going to start to want their rights protected by the British government, and they don't see their rights as being protected by the British government. And we all know what happens when the government doesn't protect your rights. People start to get the ideas that they should overthrow the government and start something else. And that's exactly what's going to eventually happen. Okay? People like John Locke, a British philosopher, they started to propagate these ideas that people are born with natural rights. Okay? These are rights that you just have because you're born. All right? He wrote a book called Two Treatises on Government. He said all men are born with natural rights, including life, liberty, and property. Now, you've probably heard that said as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But John Locke said that all people had rights to life, liberty, and property. He said people were bound to obey the government unless it violated those natural rights to life, liberty, and property. And he advocated for something called civil disobedience. Okay? Civil disobedience is when you break the law, but only because the law infringes upon your natural rights. All right? These ideas will take hold in the American colonies. They will look at the British government as violating their natural rights, violating their rights to property, violating their rights to make a profit, right? And in doing so, they're going to spark an American Revolution, okay? So that is it for today. We will pick back up with the next lesson, and I hope you guys are having a great day.